Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We will be getting started shortly. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We will be getting started shortly. Just waiting for a few more folks to join. Thanks. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I am noticing that there are a bunch of folks who've joined us who are all named the same thing. And that is, so the name that everyone is named Sophia Ichizawa. If you would be able to rename yourself, that would help us greatly. Thank you so much.
Recording in progress.
All right, Karina, I think we can go ahead and get started.
All right, great. So we can start with a quick announcement about interpretation and then go through the Zoom guidance before handing it over to Mayor Arrigo, who's here tonight to give a warm welcome.
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Elida Acuña Martínez. Yo voy a ser la intérprete en esta noche. En unos momentitos ustedes van a ver un mundo en la parte de abajo, ya sea de su computadora o si tienen un teléfono, hay 3 puntitos donde ustedes pueden escoger los 3 puntos y van a ver el mundo, y en el mundo van a poder escoger si quieren escuchar la presentación en español o en inglés. Si quieren la interpretación en español, simplemente presionan español y automáticamente los va a pasar al cuarto de español. Y ahora le voy a ceder el paso a el alcalde Arrigo. So now I'm just going to
Perfect, thank you. All right, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many Revere residents turn out tonight to be involved in the inclusionary zoning process. My name is Karina Oliver Milchman. I'm with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the regional planning agency providing technical assistance on this process to the city of Revere. I'm here tonight with several of my colleagues, including Alexis Smith and Christian Brandt, who will be doing the bulk of the talking with you this evening. But before we get going, I want to turn it over to Mayor Arrigo. Mayor.
Thank you, Karina. Good evening, everyone. A little bit of feedback. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining this conversation tonight. And I want to thank everyone for their incredible work in getting us to this point, and their feedback and the time and energy that it takes to get us to the point where we are right now, which I'm really excited about, seeing some recommendations and really moving forward in terms of how we get the ball of inclusionary zoning passed over the goal line. And it's something that is obviously a priority for me and my administration, something that we look for the feedback that you all can provide. And just want to thank you for taking that time to make this a reality. And I'm going to kick it over to Alexis from MAPC.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. So before I get started, I'm just going to quickly go through what the evening is going to look like. We've had again, thank you, Mayor, for the welcome. I'm going to spend right now about a half hour speaking about the draft policy recommendations and provide an overview for you. After that, there will be an opportunity for questions. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the chat, and we'll log them and be sorting them to address after the presentation. And then after the kind of high level Q&A session, we're going to have some small group breakouts to have a more in-depth discussion or to ask some additional follow-up questions. And so just as any questions as we go along, just feel free to type them in, and we will be watching them and coming back to them afterwards. And for anyone who's joined just now, we'll put a link to the Spanish to access the Spanish translation, and we'll continue to have that throughout. So with that, Christian, is
Alexis,
there anything? Yes.
Before we continue, I think we might be having a slight technical issue with the interpretation.
Got it.
So I'm just going to turn the interpretation off and then turn it back on again so that Alita can, so that we can try and troubleshoot that. So sorry.
Estamos teniendo un poquito de problemas con la interpretación.
So I can hear you in the main room, Alita, so I'm going to turn the interpretation back on. I can hear you, and I'm in the Spanish interpretation room, so I think we're good to go. All right, thank you so much. Sorry about that, Alexis. I think we solved that problem.
No problem. Glad it's all set. So with that, let's jump in. I'm here to speak about the draft inclusionary zoning policy recommendations, which we've been working on for several months since we last saw several of you at the forum in the fall. Before I get into those, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on how we got to where we are tonight. And for some of you will have heard this before, but to folks as a refresher or to newcomers, just kind of what it is that we're looking at accomplishing in Revere. So how does inclusionary zoning work? The way it works is it's a city policy that says that anytime new housing is built above a certain size, while most of the units are market rates, a certain percentage of those units have to be affordable to low income families. So it's pretty simple. That is a simple concept that is going to get more complicated as we go on throughout the evening, but that's the basis. It is a couple of things to keep in mind. It's a long-term strategy. In any given year, it's not going to necessarily produce a ton of affordable housing, but once the city has it in place, over time, it'll just keep adding affordable units. So this is really a long view policy. A second point is that it relies on private developers to create affordable housing. That's essentially asking the private market, just a business owner, to provide a public good, which is affordable housing. And so there's some things that make because of that, we have to think about ways to balance costs. If the city asks for too much, then there's a risk of the developer needing to increase rents on the market rate units or to deter development altogether. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. And again, you'll have opportunities to ask questions about any of this after the presentation. A few more things to keep in mind. Inclusionary zoning cannot replace deeply affordable housing that's built by nonprofit developers, because it doesn't use a lot of subsidy. It can't reach those deep income levels. Typically, when a nonprofit developer is building very deeply affordable housing, they're receiving subsidy from the local, state, and federal government that's upwards of $300,000 or $400,000 per unit. An inclusionary policy is great because it doesn't require those resources, but it means that we can't ask for as much from the affordable housing that is coming out of this policy. So I say this a lot, but this is not a silver bullet. Inclusionary zoning is intended to be paired with a lot of other strategies that the city can use to reach, to reach affordability at all different levels. All right, so let's start to get into it. Context for what we thought about as we were working with folks to develop these recommendations. We based them on three different things: local need, community input, and a financial analysis. So first, local need. I think if you're here, you probably know all of this already. Rent in Revere is very, very high, particularly compared to Revere's relatively low median income when compared to the rest of the greater Boston region. Rent in Revere is upwards of, the median rent in Revere is $2,000 a unit a month. That's more than most residents can afford. Sales prices have also been increasing very, very steeply over the past several years. 44% of households in Revere are cost burdened, which means that they pay more than 30% of their income towards housing, just kind of like a benchmark that the government uses to determine whether you're paying too much for housing or not. There are over 12,000 low-income households in Revere. That's more than half of the households in Revere overall. And over half of these households are extremely low income. So there's as everybody knows in Revere, there's a lot of need for affordable housing, and the affordable housing that does exist just isn't enough to meet that need. Getting into is a little bit more detail on that. The blue arrow that you see shows greater Boston area median income, which for a family of four is $120,000. And when I say median income, that means that in all of greater Boston, exactly half of families earn less than $120,000 a year, and exactly half of families earn more than $120,000 a year. It's right in the middle. So that's for all of greater Boston. And you kind of 80% of that amount is what the government considers to be low income. But the kicker is in Revere, Revere's median income is less than half of that. So we're getting creative in how we develop a policy that is going to really address needs at that deeper, lower income level, which we'll get into as we go along. This is just repeating something I said previously. Over half of households are low income. But I guess this also shows there's a lot of scale or a range when it comes to low income. There are extremely low income households, which kind of are folks earning minimum wage. There's very low income households, and there's moderately low income households, which are like perhaps your firefighters or your teachers are the examples folks always like to use. And inclusionary zoning is typically going to provide for folks at that very low income and moderately low income range. So that's need. There's a lot of need in Revere. The second thing that we considered when we developed these recommendations was community input. We worked with an advisory committee of folks who are active locally and who are really committed to advancing Revere's housing needs in an equitable way. And we've been meeting with them regularly to check in, review process and gut check policy recommendations. We have heard from the broader public through two public forums, of which this is the second, and we'll be asking for your input tonight on the draft recommendations. And finally, we interviewed probably close to a dozen real estate professionals who are active in Revere, both nonprofit and for-profit developers, property managers, just to get a sense for what things are really like in Revere, to make sure that we're making the right assumptions about what this policy can and can't do. key things that we heard from the previous forum in terms of takeaways. Folks are very supportive of a policy that would encourage family size units. When used in exchange for more affordability, folks were very supportive of allowing additional units in exchange for more affordability, reducing parking requirements in exchange for more affordability, and strong support for offering property tax relief in exchange for affordability. I should note that there was generally slightly more support for a policy that would maximize the number of affordable units created, as opposed to a policy that would make units affordable to the deeper income levels. But we'll talk about that differentiation a little more later on. There was not a lot of support for a payment in lieu, which means that the developer would say, instead of building an affordable unit in my project, I'm just going to pay the city a fee that they will then use for affordable housing. And then there were some other things that there was not so much consensus on. And as we go through the recommendations, I'll be flagging areas where the recommendation overlaps with community priorities. Finally, the third thing that inform these recommendations is a financial analysis. And we used what's called a pro forma, a financial pro forma, which is a tool that developers use to, when they're considering, building a housing development, is this going to work? Is this going to, is this going to be profitable? Is this going to lose money? And we took a bunch of different inclusionary policy options and ran them through this model to say, okay, well, what can we ask for and what can we offer as a cost offset to balance, getting a little more from community priorities. That considers a lot of things. We looked at the number of units, different affordability levels, all different cost offsets, different ways to calculate an in lieu fee, and all of that, is to ensure that the policy options that we're presenting you tonight are options that will not negatively impact market rents or deter development. So here's what everyone has been waiting for. We're getting into the policy options now. First, I'm going to give a brief overview of the big picture. We have two options. And first, I'm going to give an overview of the big picture differences between those two options. And then I'm going to spend a fair amount of time going through the individual pieces of every single one. So if you feel at first like you didn't quite catch everything, we'll be going through everything again as we move through the presentation. So we have two options. In general, the first option, which is going to be shown in blue throughout this presentation, is what we're calling the deeper affordability option. And as you might expect, this is an option that would create units that are more deeply affordable for lower income households. What enables that is property tax relief. It's a very powerful cost offset, but the trade-off for that is that it takes a longer time to adopt because it requires state approval. Again, I'm going to be getting into all of this in more detail as we go along. The second option, which we're calling moderate affordability, would require affordable units to a mix of low and moderate income folks. And it does not include property tax relief, and thus requires a shorter timeline because it only needs local approval. So this is something I want you to keep in mind as we're going through this. When I say deeper affordability, any of these policies highlighted in the blue color, we're talking about households earning 50 to 60% of area median income. So if you think back to that slide with the people on it, that is right about equal. That's in the range of what Revere's median is. When we're talking about 50 to 60, when we're talking about 50% AMI, that means a single person earning less than $47,000 a year, and a 4-person household earning less than $67,000 a year. So those, and 60% AMI is a bit more than that. So that's our deeper affordability option. Our moderate affordability option includes units for 80% AMI, which is for one person earning less than $70,000, and for a 4-person family earning less than $101,000. Both options include units that are affordable to 60% AMI, which is kind of that middle column there. All of that, I know this is a lot of numbers that we're throwing at you. All of this is available through a handout online, which we will link to later in the evening if you just want to be able to refer back to it. But for now, just kind of this is what I mean when I say deeper affordability versus moderate affordability. There we go. Here's a little bit more of the details. So just right now, I'm just going to go through the differences again, and then we're going to go through each of these individual elements, one by one. The deeper affordability is, provides units for households earning 50 to 60% AMI, pretty, right around Revere's median. Moderate affordability in the yellow is 60 to 80% AMI. And both of those are split between the two. As I said previously, the big difference is the property tax relief for the deeper affordability versus for the more moderate affordability. There is, there still are cost offsets. One of them is a building permit fee, which is not included in the first option. But aside from that, a lot of things are the same for both options, and we'll go through those as well. So now getting into the details. First, the number of units that are required to be affordable. In both policies, both options, the policy would require that 15% of all units in new housing developments are affordable. That was informed by community input, since folks felt very strongly that they wanted to maximize the number of affordable units to the greatest extent possible. And this policy does that. 10 to 15% is a typical what you would see for an inclusionary policy in Massachusetts. So we're both of these are at the higher end of what's common. So that's the same across both units. And again, keep in mind, this is 15 is a very cumulative, this is a cumulative policy. 15% of units for developments happening, year after year after year, that's going to add up. And you'll see in municipalities that have had inclusionary zoning in place for 20 years, it's generated a lot of units. So I don't want people to be, deterred by the 15%. That's actually, it's a relatively high number for an inclusionary policy. Second, income targets. Who is going to be able to move into these units or be able to afford these units, I should say. The first option, as I've said, a range of between 50 to 60% AMI. And that range is just smaller projects provide more units at the higher income level, and larger projects, because larger projects can handle more, they're providing more units at that deeper 50% AMI income level. This aligns with what we know of need. As I've said previously, it doesn't hit that like deepest income levels because that's really difficult for an inclusionary policy to do. But it is substantially deeper than most policies that you'll see in Massachusetts. Most in Massachusetts require between 60 to 80% AMI, and this is a lot deeper than that. So we're excited about that. So that's the first option. The second option is similar in that it asks for a different, split of affordability depending on project size, and that smaller projects now are being asked to provide units at 80%, more units at 80% AMI, and as the project gets larger, it provides more units at the lower 60% AMI. This is more similar to a conventional policy that is quite common across Massachusetts. A lot of policies ask for units within this income range. I think to the extent that it can, it still does address kind of the deeper need. 60% AMI is at the low end of what policies typically, you'll typically see, and 15% of units with a fair amount of those at 60% AMI is actually still a very that's still a very progressive policy, but it's just not that deeper affordability that the first option gets to. Something that's common, the third element I want to talk about is local preference. Either policy would recommend as a strong local preference option. That means that someone who lives in Revere already gets preference over someone who is not a Revere resident. The city could also structure it as someone who works in Revere could get preference. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. And the reason why we're including that is that there's such high need among Revere residents, and many are at risk of displacement. And so this is an important component of either option. The next piece I want to talk about is cost offsets. That's, as I said at the beginning, this is a policy where the city is asking a private business, a developer, to provide a pretty hefty public benefit in affordable housing. And the way that works is that a city asking, an inclusionary policy needs to include some cost offsets to balance those costs. Across Massachusetts, there are a lot of cities that just say, we're not interested in offering very many offsets, so we're just going to have all of our units at a higher 80% AMI range. As municipalities want to offer more or deeper affordability, they need to add in more cost offsets so that things balance out. And so just an overview of the cost offsets. In both policies, we're recommending a parking reduction and dimensional relief, which I'll explain when we get to that slide. And then deeper affordability also has the offset of property tax relief. And the second option, moderate affordability, uses a building permit fee waiver. So looking at the parking reduction, this is something that got very strong support at the first community forum. And combined with the other cost offsets, it's actually a very, very powerful offset, a way to balance deeper affordability. Parking is structured parking space. Just one parking space can cost $30,000 a pop. And those costs are passed right on to whoever's going to be moving into the apartment. Revere's parking policy is currently pretty outdated and not necessarily reflective of the fact that Revere is a real transit-rich area with a lot of amenities in walking distance. The requirement right now is 2 spaces a unit. And this policy would allow that to go down to a half a space per unit near transit, no minimum near transit, and a half a space a unit for other projects. This is based on, we spent a lot of time analyzing permitting data over the past 5 to 10 years. And nearly every development project that has come through the city has sought a variance for a parking reduction. So even though that seems like a big jump, these, half a space or less than half a space near transit are actually pretty reflective of what developers are building and what folks' parking needs are when you're in an area that has so much transit. The second piece of the cost offsets is dimensional relief. And like parking, this would be the same across both policies. And dimensional relief is just a kind of wonky way of saying that, there are certain requirements that developers would have a little bit more flexibility on. This is also based on what we've seen in terms of where folks are seeking relief in projects that have already been permitted. These would be allowing a decrease of the minimum lot size. So right now the city says, lots below a certain size, you can't build on them. And this would, allow you to build on smaller lots. Maximum floor area ratio, which is kind of a planner-y way to look at how big the building is. That would, you could increase up to 25%. And then setbacks. So that's what says how close the building needs to be to the street or from the side yard. Those would be a decrease. And again, these are based on where projects have already sought and been awarded zoning relief. So now getting into the final piece of the cost offsets. This is only an offset that you'll see for deeper affordability for this first option is property tax relief. Property tax, what we're recommending is property tax relief only for the affordable units. So the market rate units would continue to pay the full amount of property tax assessed, but the affordable units would not be required to pay those, would not be assessed that property tax. This is far and away the most powerful tool to get that deeper affordability. When you're saying, where you're looking at these two different policies and why one can offer 50% AMI affordability at 50% AMI when the other can't, this is the reason why. This is how we're getting there. The thing to consider with this one is that property tax relief in Massachusetts is not something that can be offered by a city. The city would need to seek state permission to get that, and because of that, this policy would take longer to implement. So later in the evening, when we give you the survey, we're going to be asking some questions about, pros and cons, and, that's, one of the drawbacks of this. But in exchange for the longer timeline, it would offer the real deep affordability at 50% AMI. The second option, moderate affordability option, does not include that tax relief. And because it doesn't include that, the only approvals that are needed are local approvals. So it would be effective as soon as the city council and the mayor approve it. Because it doesn't include property tax relief, the affordability is more moderate, ranging from, as we said, the 60% to 80% AMI. We do include a recommendation to waive the building permit fee. And that, with the other offsets, is what allows allows us to keep the requirement for 15% of units, with a big chunk of them at the 60% AMI. So that's back to the big picture. A few things that I didn't speak about with individual slides. We're recommending that both policies apply to projects that are 6 units or larger. This is very common. Most policies in the state kick in at 6 or 10 units. That's just because smaller projects smaller than 6 units, really, it's can't handle this sort of fee without and remain feasible. The second, at the very bottom of the slide, in lieu fee, for both projects, we're recommending that in lieu fee be allowed only for projects 12 units and smaller. That's because, again, these smaller projects have a lot harder time making an affordability requirement pencil. And so for small projects less than 12 units, we're saying, all right, because the ask is still relatively robust in terms of affordability, those smaller projects could satisfy the requirement by paying a fee to the city that would then be used for affordable housing. The vast majority of projects, though, any project larger than 12 units would not be allowed to use an in lieu fee and would be required to build those units on site. That's important for equity reasons. It means that the affordable units would be spread out, throughout the city and located, in market rate units, located, alongside market rate units. And that's something that received very strong support, as limiting the extent to which a developer could use an in lieu fee. Similarly, this policy our recommendations for both policies are that they do not permit units to be constructed off-site. That would be if the developer said, all right, well, I'll build your affordable units, but I'm going to build them on a different piece of land. Again, from an equity perspective, it's that this allowing or not allowing off-site units means that the units would be built at the same time as the market rate units on the same site, with all the same access to transit and retail, or whatever benefits come with the site that the developer is building on. Finally, this isn't on the slide, but we are recommending that both of policies apply citywide. There had been some discussion at the previous forum whether the policy should be applied differently depending on different areas of the city. And for simplicity's sake, we are recommending that the same policy apply universally for the whole be applied the same way across the whole city. We do factor into some differences in scale by the larger projects being required to provide a greater share of the more affordable units. So we're kind of getting at the larger developments, addressing larger developments that way, rather than through geography. So that is a lot of information. Our next steps, we're going to jump into question and answer session. Because that was so much information, we have the links to some of the key points available in a handout, which we can post the link in the chat either now or later this evening. So if you need to refer back to the big summary of the slides or what AMI means, we'll have that accessible through a link. So, and our next steps are to finalize our recommendations based on what we hear from you tonight, work with the city to draft the policy, and then seek adoption. That's where the project is headed, but your more immediate next steps tonight are to please complete the survey. You'll have the option, if we haven't posted the link, and we will momentarily, but that will close at 8 p.m. tonight. This is not a long-term survey. We want to make sure to get your input here and now, so that we can keep this process moving. So please make sure to fill out the survey. If you have questions, we're going to have a question and answer session right now. So if you haven't already and you have any questions, please type them into the chat. We'll answer them right now. Following this question and answers, we'll be breaking into small groups. Those are optional. If you feel like you understand what's going on and you know what your priorities are, then you can move straight onto the survey and you don't have to join the small groups. Those are available for if you have additional questions or just kind of want to discuss a little bit more. So now I'm going to pass it over to Christian for the question and first to kick off the question and answers.
Great, thanks, Alexis. So we have a couple of questions that have been posted in the chat. So I'll just start with the first one that we received, and that is from Ralph De Chico, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Ralph asked, with parking at a premium in this city, how is it viable to reduce parking requirements? What data drove that decision?
The data that drove that decision is what has recently been permitted and approved for development projects since 2014, I believe. The city provided us with data on every project that's been permitted and sought, and what relief they were seeking. And I think like all but one of them asked for parking relief and was granted parking relief. So that means that the city looked at that request and also said, yeah, we think this is reasonable, a reasonable reduction in the amount of parking that you're requiring. It's so that's based on that data from the city. Also just based on what on conversations we've had about, with conversations that I've had with folks about market trends. There's just not a demand for 2 spaces a unit, and 2 spaces a unit has not been built on any project that's been built in Revere in the past a decade. So just based on what we've seen on the ground.
I'll just add, the parking requirements in Revere zoning are unusually high compared to similar communities that are well served by transit, and that the policy recommendation tries to be sensitive to areas that are really close to transit service versus areas that aren't, where more parking may be required or needed. Mm-hmm.
And those reductions don't mean that that a developer cannot build more parking if they want to. If a developer thinks, the people who are going to be moving into this building are probably going to have cars, there's nothing stopping them from building more. It's just not requiring them to build more.
Great. Thanks, Alexis and Karina. So we got a second question, and that was from Med Alawi, and that is, are low credit score applicants eligible to participate in eligible for the affordable housing produced through inclusionary zoning?
Yeah, I mean, the affordable units would be they're typically run through, or just folks are selected through a lottery. So any eligible household who earns within that income range could apply. I think I can't speak specifically to what credit rating may or may not, be considered, but generally, the application is going to be based on that, a household who earns lower income and, and an associative credit score.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. So Ralph posted another question in the chat, and that is, we're seeing new development that had parking reductions and it did not allow off-street parking that could not get off-street parking permits now come before Traffic Commission looking for them. So I think this is basically just saying that some of the new developments had parking reductions and didn't allow off-street parking, but the residents or the development itself is going before the Traffic Commission looking for parking permits. I suppose that's more of a statement than a question. Michael Ragusa asked a question, and that is, what other communities already participate in this program, and what is their success rate?
In Massachusetts, this is a local policy, and so each city and town in Massachusetts just decides on their own that they're going to adopt it. I believe there are over 150 municipalities in Massachusetts that have adopted a policy, and the policies look different from city to city and town to town based on what their goals are and what their needs are. I think success rate, that varies on how you define success. I think the municipalities that have had inclusionary zoning in place for 2 or 3 decades, like Cambridge has had it in place for a while, Brookline, those communities have hundreds of affordable units that they've generated through an inclusionary policy. So I think that's certainly success. As communities grow and figure out what their needs are, they're constantly adjusting their policies too, which I think is also a success, to say, here's how we're changing our policy to apply to our changing housing needs. So we can get into more on what it looks like in other communities in the discussion groups if you'd like, but this is a very, very common policy in Massachusetts, is the short answer.
Great, thanks. Michael followed up with another question that I'm sure is probably related to the first one, and that is, won't the Suffolk Downs development remediate this problem? I think this is also specifically about why inclusionary zoning would be beneficial in terms of providing affordable housing, given the other stuff that's happening in the city.
For that, for Suffolk Downs, I'm going to ask someone from the city to respond to that, because I am not sure of how that's playing out. I don't know if Ruben or Tech is able to unmute themselves.
Sure. Hi, everyone. For those of you who are not familiar with me, just a quick introduction. My name is Tech Lang, and I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. And I may, if the mayor is actually available, toss this over to him as well. But the very simple answer to that question is that Suffolk Downs is a site that straddles both Boston, specifically East Boston and Revere. And as the planning and permitting for each portion or each side of that site advanced, East Boston had an inclusionary zoning or an inclusionary housing policy in place that mandated that, and Revere did not have one at the time. There were other Revere benefits with regards to economic development that were negotiated as part of that site, which is very much tied to economic development goals associated with job creation. But the sort of short version of the answer to your question is that inclusionary zoning was not in place in Revere, so that was not a requirement officially for the developer.
I would add one thing to that, is that in the comparison between Boston and Revere in terms of the mix of uses at Suffolk Downs, Boston was much more focused on housing creation. And as Tech said, we were more focused on commercial development, job creation, and to the point where 50% of the square footage that gets built at Suffolk Downs on the Revere side will be commercial, office, retail space. And we see that already with the fact that the first phase of the building at Suffolk Downs, or the first phase of Suffolk Downs, will include approximately 500,000 square feet of life science lab and office space. And so that's happening in part because of the fact that we wanted to have more commercial space. We wanted to have less housing, and we didn't have an inclusionary zoning policy in place.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Our next question, I'm going to sort of condense, I think, two into one, both of which were about accessible apartments. So the question was, will any of these units be required to be built to be wheelchair accessible? So I'll start with that, and then there's a follow-up question about, additional question about accessibility as well.
Yeah, that's governed by the building code. Typically, 5 to 10% of units in new buildings that are large enough to include an elevator are required to be accessible, and that share would apply to the affordable units as well.
Great. So similarly to that, just to follow up on the more specific example, is there a specific separate percentage that will be required for accessible apartments? Is that part of the set aside percentage that is being considered?
There's the policy options as they stand do not include a specific requirement for additional accessibility. They just say that the affordable units have to be, of the same composition as the market rate units. So 10% of the whole building is accessible, then 10% of the affordable units need to be accessible. If the city has other priorities, they could certainly, encourage more accessibility, but that's not included in the policy as it stands now, or as it's proposed now.
Great, thanks, Alexis. I'm also just noting that we were asked a question in Spanish. So, Alida, if you would be willing to send me post a translation of that question, just so that we can answer it, that would be great. We did get one question which Karina answered, but I think that it's worth just highlighting for everyone here as well. And that was, do Revere residents get priority? And the answer to that is yes, Revere residents get priority for a certain number of affordable housing units in each building. But they still must submit an application to the lottery and also meet the income requirements that all of the rest of the applicants will need to meet. So the question that was asked in Spanish, Alida has provided the translation, and that is, do you know if there's a study about the impact that this construction will have on Revere's schools? I'm mentioning this because the schools are pretty crowded.
So this policy would not create any more, whether or not either of these policy options move forward will not change the amount of housing that's built in Revere. This policy applies to housing that is already going to be built. So that in and of itself won't change won't change the number of units that are built in Revere. I don't know if Ruben or Tech, if you want to say something specifically about the schools, but the number of units would be the same under this, whether this policy exists or not. There would just be affordable units underneath one of these policies.
I don't think we have anything to add on those schools. Great. I think you covered it pretty well.
Sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
All right, thanks, Alexis. I know that there's some more questions that have come in, but I think it's time for us to go into our breakout rooms. That's a great place to ask some more specific questions that you might have about the program or about inclusionary zoning more generally, or about the presentation that Alexis provided today. So before we do this, I just want to explain a little bit about how going into breakout rooms will work for those of you who are new to this. I will assign each person to a breakout room. You will get a notification on your screen that says the host would like you to join breakout room 7 or so forth. In order to go into the room, you will have to press join or OK, depends on which version of Zoom you have. Before I get started with that, and this is sort of somewhat unique because we do have a number of folks who have all joined under the same name, and I want to make sure that those folks who speak Spanish are able to access the Spanish breakout room. So what I'm going to ask is I'm going to create the breakout rooms, and if you speak Spanish, if you could ignore the prompt and stay in the main room. So don't move into a breakout room. Don't click join. Stay into the main room. That will make sure that everyone who speaks Spanish, I can make sure that they are in the breakout room that's facilitated in Spanish and not in a breakout room that's facilitated in English. So again, just to repeat that, we'll be having breakout rooms. There will be one room that is facilitated in Spanish. And if you are somebody who would like to be in the Spanish facilitation breakout room, ignore the prompt that will come on the screen when I turn on the breakout rooms and stay in the main room. So that means you should be able to see me on your screen, and you should be able to see the some other folks that you might know on the screen, but specifically just ignore the prompt so that you can stay in the main room, and that way I will be able to send you into a breakout room that is Spanish speaking and not into one that is English speaking. So I know that's a little complicated, but hopefully this will work for us. I also just wanted to quickly go over some objectives for the breakout room and some group agreements. So we really want to use this as a space to make sure that everyone's questions about the IZ inclusionary zoning proposals are able to be answered. But in order to do that, we want to make sure that we're able to have a respectful and fruitful conversation in the breakout rooms. And so we like to use a few group agreements in order to guide our conversations there. So those are on the screen. I'm going to read them off. The first one says be fully present, and this just means make sure that you're engaging. If you have questions, that's the space to answer them. We really encourage you to speak up and ask questions to the folks who are there. Use I statements. So if you're speaking from your own experience, make sure that you're starting a sentence from that perspective as well. If you're somebody who likes to talk a lot like me, you might need to remember to take some space to ask your questions, but leave some space for some other folks in the room to also ask their own questions. And then, of course, these breakout rooms are for educational purposes for this and to get your questions answered. So we ask that you take the lesson that you've learned, but not the story. So what that means is if someone is sharing their personal experience, you can share with other people who weren't here what you might have learned, but keep their information in the breakout room itself. So that way people can feel as comfortable sharing and asking questions as possible. So we posted the link to the survey in the chat. If you would like to just take the survey, you are welcome to do that. These breakout rooms are optional. I'm going to give some folks the opportunity to leave to take the survey if they would like, so that we can get into the breakout rooms. But they are ready to go. So if you are interested in going into a breakout room, you will get a prompt. And as I said before, if you would like to be in the Spanish room, please don't respond to the box that shows up. Just stay in the main room with me, and then we will get you into the right place. And Valentina and Alita, if you would be willing to stay in the main room too, that would be great, just in case. All right. So all rooms are opening in just a second. All right, so as a reminder, if you would like to be in the Spanish room, please make sure to stay here with me